Hi, welcome to Abu Aardvark's Middle East Channel Editor's video blog. We have a special episode this week. We're going to talk to Ashraf Khalil, an Egyptian journalist and author of Liberation Square, who visited George Washington University this week and had a chance to sit down and talk about the Egyptian Revolution and what's happened since and where we think it's going. A lot of other things happened this week. The anniversary of the Bahraini uprising, the anniversary of the Libyan Revolution. We've also had last week the anniversary of the fall of Hosni Mubarak, and we've had an ongoing debate about what to do about the bloodshed and atrocities in Syria. Before turning it over to my conversation with Ashraf Khalil, I just wanted to share with you one thing. The Syrian government of Bashar al-Assad has announced that there's going to be a referendum on a new constitution. The American government has described this as laughable, and it's hard to disagree with that characterization. But it does make me think of another election in Syria, and my favorite souvenir, I think, from my entire time traveling in the Middle East. As we think about what kind of election we're likely to see under the current conditions in Syria and how legitimate it's likely to be as a path forward for reform, I simply want to share with you groovy Hafez al-Assad campaign poster that I picked up on one of my trips to Syria many years ago. Groovy Hafez al-Assad. Yeah, democratic reform in Syria. And with that, let me turn it over to my conversation with Ashraf Khalil. All right, I'd like to welcome Ashraf Khalil. He is an Egyptian journalist and author of the new book, Liberation Square, Inside the Egyptian Revolution and the Rebirth of a Nation. He's here at George Washington University talking about the book, and we took the opportunity to sit down and talk. And so, Ashraf, today is February 10th.
Yes.
And a year ago today, you're in Tahrir, and we're waiting and waiting for the man to just leave already. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're looking back. A year has gone by. How do you assess what's happened? Is it succeeding? Is it failing? How would you assess the Egyptian Revolution a year on?
It's incredibly confusing, but I do think we need to resist the natural inclination to do a snap judgment in that there's this perception, and it's not just overseas, it's inside of Egypt, that, oh, the revolution is failing, the revolution is being hijacked. And that perception, it's much too early for that. We need several years before we can really judge. And I've been trying to sort of come up with a set of metrics to really judge the success or failure of the revolution, knowing that we're on a several-year timeline. And B, I think that perception is overlooking a lot of really amazing kind of points of no return that have been passed, politically, emotionally, and psychologically within Egypt that have been passed. One of my favorite Egyptian activists, and someone I really turn to for interpretation, he pops up in the book a lot, is a guy named Khalil. No relation to me. He's a longtime revolutionary socialist, has been protesting since his 20s. He's in his mid-40s now. And
I told Weil in December he was my favorite activist. I think I made him blush.
He's my favorite too. He really is, because he's reasonable. And when I talked to Wael near the end of last year, he was very frustrated because he told me, he's like, I feel like people are losing sight of the fact that we are winning. And he proceeded to list all these things that have happened. And he acknowledges that the fight is not over. I think even the most optimistic, the most rational, the Wael Khalils of on the scene, acknowledge that the revolution was not completed, that what started as a genuine popular uprising ended 18 days later in a palace coup. And they are trying to fix that right now. But that does not mean failure. It just means a longer timeline.
Well, what do you think then about the strategy of at least some of the activists? They keep going back into the streets. They keep calling for these marches. And increasingly, they keep getting into these violent confrontations. And, and as we know, there's really sharply split opinion about this.
Yes.
Some will say that, well, this is what it's going to take to unmask the reality of SCAF oppression. And others say, this is pointless. There's no strategy here. And where are we going with it? Where do you fall in that big debate?
I'm conflicted. You're right in that the idea of continued street action and continued street violence. Oh no!
You know this is live when the Egyptian's phone goes off in the middle of the event.
Sorry about that.
No, we're going to keep that.
Great. Yeah, welcome. It's about your little touch of Egyptian authenticity. It's a very conflicting question in that you're correct in saying that the idea of continued street action is very divisive in Egyptian society. The protests that cropped up in late November and then again in December were hugely unpopular all around the country. But I cannot blame the activists for wanting to continue to push. The activists are completely aware that they are in a minority. They are fine with that. They think they were in the minority a year ago. And the one thing, if they are continuing to take to the streets, part of that I blame on the SCAF. I blame that on the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, because we have a clear lesson here that the only thing that produces genuine concessions is street action. You can sit down with a calendar and point to street action, violent street action, concession, violent street action, concession. The November and December clashes, like I said, were hugely unpopular. They also produced a massive, tangible concession in that prior to that, we didn't even know when the presidential election was. And the SCAF was pushing this plan that would keep them holding executive power through early 2013. In the wake of that, they set a date for the presidential election in June 2012, and they pushed up their departure by 6 to 8 months. It's a huge win. And at the time in Egypt, it didn't feel like a huge win. This is one of the things that frustrates.
That's one of the great things which is so difficult to comprehend, is that the SCAF seems to do everything in its power to make sure that this keeps happening, because they never make concessions until it gets to that point, but then they never make enough of a concession to actually satisfy everybody, thereby inviting the next round. And this has gone, we've seen at least 4 iterations of this now.
And I mean, the SCAF, the bottom line, the SCAF is trying to change as little as humanly possible and only respond to street action. And I do fear, the reason I'm conflicted about it is that I do fear that this is having a negative impact among the activist ranks, and that there is a very kind of nihilistic element creeping in among the activists. I witnessed the clashes in November and December, and I got a real queasy feeling at times, because I'm watching young activists cheer as the building for the, how do I translate this, the General Authority for Roads and Bridges starts going up in flames. We're not talking about the Interior Ministry or a police station or the National Democratic Party headquarters or even the Information Ministry. You know, honestly, if someone wants to set fire to the Ministry of Information, I will bring the marshmallows. I really will. But the General Authority for Roads and Bridges, obviously they've probably done a pretty bad job with the roads and the bridges, but that doesn't mean they deserve to get burned down. So this idea that anything that represents government, you know, that's creeping in among the activists, and I can't blame them for it, but it gives me a really weird feeling.
I had the same feeling when I was there in December. It was
creepy.
It was an ugly scene down there.
Yes.
But when you have the conversations with the activists about it, they're very defensive about it, and I can understand why, because they feel that they're being defamed by the media, and they also feel, as you said, that this is the only thing which has worked. So why should they stop?
Exactly, and like I said, they are not expecting the country to rally around their side.
What about the parliament? Is there any chance that, I personally have placed a great amount of hope in the idea that parliament would emerge as a power center and actually see a shift to some kind of entrenched democracy. Do you see any sign of that happening?
Not yet, but it's very early days. Right now the parliament is a bit of a circus, and that is to be expected because none of these people really have any experience in coalition building and democracy. I mean, the Muslim Brotherhood are famous for not working and playing well with the other children. The Salafists are even worse. And the liberals, I dislike that term, the secularist, because I mean, we use sort of secular and liberal interchangeably in Egypt to mean non-Islamist. And frankly, you know, a healthy chunk of the liberals are borderline fascists. They're just not Islamists.
Right.
But the secularists are still kind of reeling from their perceived defeat. And a lot of their impulse after the elections was just to decry the whole thing and take their ball and go home. So there's not really a coalition building mood, but I think there's going to be. They have to learn. I think they're going to learn on the fly.
When I saw them actually able to summon the Minister of the Interior to testify, and he came, to me that seemed like a really big moment. I'm not sure anything came out of it concretely at that moment.
But the symbolism.
But symbolically, I thought it was important. All right, we have to go, but I want to thank Ashraf for joining us on Abu Aardvark's Middle East Channel video blog by his book, Liberation Square. And thanks, Ashraf.
Thank you.